Welcome to the Arrive Podcast, the U.S. Immigration Law Podcast for Canadians. Today, we are going to be discussing what if you are denied entry to the United States. And we've narrowed it down to what we think are the top three reasons people are denied entry to the United States when entering from Canada. To simplify it and to be able to focus our conversation on these three main reasons people are denied. The first reason we see people are denied is that they have the wrong intent when they're coming into the United States for what they're doing in the United States. The second would be they could potentially be working in the United States and don't have proper authorization to do what they're doing in the United States. And the third would be that they are inadmissible to the United States for some reason. So the first thing we're going to talk about is Canadians in general, right? Mm-hmm. Canadians in general have a status that is called visa exempt. I guess that's not a status. They're visa exempt, which means just like Americans, they're not required to have a visa to enter the United States. They're exempt from having to have that.
Right. And it's kind of a unique status too, because most other countries that don't require a visa aren't visa exempt. They actually are part of a visa waiver.
Yeah.
They're from a visa waiver country. So
you actually have to fill out a form and declare certain things so that you can get your visa waiver.
Right. So this is a unique, perspective for Canadians. They're the only ones that really are visa exempt.
Yep. They show up at the border, and if it's wrong, as long as you have the correct, and they call it WITI compliant document, Western Hemisphere Travel Initiative. So if you have certain documents to prove your identity that authorize travel, if you show up with one of those documents, for example, a passport, Nexus card, a Sentry card, like there are certain documents, if you show up with those at the port of entry, it's a valid document that allows you to simply enter the United States. And that's where we get into the reasons people are denied. So when you show up to a port of entry and you're seeking entry to the United States, even as a Canadian, even though you might be visa exempt, there's an assumption that you have to overcome to enter the United States. And the assumption is that you are immigrating to the United States, that you're an intending immigrant. So everybody that approaches the U.S. border,
Canadian or not, is presumed to be coming in as an immigrant.
In other words, you're coming here with the intent to stay permanently to the United States.
Right.
Now, if you don't have the right authorization to do that, then they could deny you entry. To immigrate to the United States, you actually have to have a visa. You cannot come in your visa exempt status if your intent is to immigrate. You also can't come to the United States if you have other intent that we'll discuss later, such as working. So the first one is your intent. What is your purpose when you're coming to the United States? Are you coming because you're a snowbird? This is a common one. You're a snowbird and you're going down to Florida and you have a vacation property down there and you're just going for a few months?
Right. So what classifies someone as an intending immigrant? What would set that off? That, the presumption's there, but what really confirms it for a border officer? Is it that you're going to stay for 6 months? Well, no, because under the visa exemption, you're allowed to come in as a visitor for up to 6 months in any 12-month period. So that's not going to prevent you from
leave and then come back
in
if they'll let you, as long as you keep demonstrating that you're just here temporarily, right? So that's a good question. So what triggers that border officer to say, you are an intending immigrant? We have many examples for this. For example, we had a current client that we're helping out, but ran into a situation. She was going to California, I think, because her U.S. citizen husband lives in California. And she declared, naively at the border that, hey, I'm going to the United States and I'm going to get married to my husband and we're going to live there permanently. Wrong answer. You are, as a visa-exempt Canadian, you cannot enter the United States with the intent to immigrate.
Right. You just confirmed that presumption for the border officer. Oh, we look at you as an intending immigrant, and you confirmed, yes, I'm intending to immigrate to the U.S.
And that's probably the number one reason, believe it or not, that I see people get refused entry, is they tell the officer straight up what they're doing.
Right.
And by telling them the wrong thing, they get denied entry.
And I think part of the the issue is that you can do that in Canada. You can show up at the border with your spouse and say, okay, we're coming to live in Canada now, and we're going to apply for permanent residence in Canada, and the border officer will allow you in some cases. In the United States, they will never allow you in if you don't have a visa to live in the United States and you say you're going to live there.
Yeah, you have to get that visa first. And there's other things that can trigger it too. And I think we've shared this example in the past, showing up at the border with your U-Haul and your goods in your car, or even an excessive amount of belongings in the car.
Or even your pets. I had someone who was denied entry because they had their pets with them, and they were, I think there were several cats, and they said, listen, if you're coming as a visitor, people don't usually, for a short period, people don't usually bring their cats. So they denied her entry. And you know what? They were right to do so. She was actually intending to immigrate to the United States when I spoke to her. That was her intention. So, they pick up on that stuff pretty easily. You have to be careful.
Or a one-way ticket, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're flying. Flying, usually you can get in easier because most people don't fly to the U.S. from Canada to stay here permanently. It's hard to bring.
And you don't fly with a U-Haul.
Yeah, you don't fly with your belongings. So if you have a round-trip ticket, that's good. But if you don't, it could be a red flag.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if they presume that you're coming to the United States to immigrate, there are things that they can ask you for, and they provide this checklist. And you can find it on our website if you look for it. It's a immigrant intent checklist is what we refer to it as, or a non-immigrant intent checklist. And it provides a list of documents that the border likes to see as evidence that you have ties to your home country, here, Canada, and that you have something to go back to. For example, do you have a job? Do you have a home? Do you go to school? Do you own property? Bank accounts, children, family, things like that you have a reason to go back to Canada. If you show up and they think that you're immigrating, and then say, you don't have a job,
do you have a house in Canada where you live? Oh, I just sold my house.
That's not good.
Yeah, and I transferred all my money to my U.S. bank account. They might deny you entry.
I quit my job.
Yeah,
my husband's already there, or my spouse is already there.
Let's be clear here. We're not saying that anybody should misrepresent to a border officer. You always be honest and answer truthfully what they ask you.
Don't put the cart before the horse is what we're saying.
Yeah. So don't do those things before you enter the United States, because you're going to get flagged. You're going to get, denied entry for immigrant intent. When we're retained to represent somebody, we send out a detailed list of instructions on how we're going to handle the case and the evidence that's required. And part of that, as well as our retainer, it says it explicitly. Do not make permanent arrangements until your visa is approved or until you're authorized to do so. Mm-hmm. Don't sell your house. Don't quit your job. Don't do any of those things until you have that visa in hand that allows you to do it. Because if for some reason it's not approved and you took those steps, you could be in a world of hurt. So you need to do things in the proper order. So you can immigrate to the United States. You can come, but you have to have the right authorization to do so. So first reason, intent. And I would say that's probably the most common reason. They identify that your intent to come to the United States does not fall under the status you're trying to enter under. So visa-exempt people coming to do things they're not allowed to do as a visa-exempt Canadian. And that leads to the second thing. As a visa-exempt Canadian, if you're coming to the United States, you can come for various purposes. Like we said, you can come to visit people. You can come to vacation. You can come for go to conferences, trade shows,
sporting events, whatever it might be. As long as it's a temporary event and you're coming to the United States and you're returning to your home country, you can do it. If, however, you're coming to the United States for purposes of work, they could deny you entry.
Right.
Why? Well, visa-exempt status does not grant authorization to work. And that applies to anybody from all over the world, not just Canadians. Canadians, just like residents of any other country, have to get authorization prior to working in the United States. So if the border officer thinks that you are coming to work in the United States or anything like unto it, and I say that because if you're coming to a meeting in the United States and you're being paid by a U.S. employer to attend that meeting, well, guess what? You're being paid to be there to attend that meeting. That's work.
Right. And we've seen people get stopped at the border and turned around for the mere reason is because they had some, tools or equipment in their car. So I had someone who called me and they owned a property, a recreational property in the U.S. and they were coming down to paint. They had paint in the car and they had some paintbrushes and tarps and stuff. And the officer said, "What's all this?" And he said, "Oh, I'm going to be painting my house this weekend." And I said, "No, you're not. That's work in the United States." And he said, "It's my own property." Turned the guy around and said, "Hire an American to come and do that work." So you got to be careful what you have with you. They're looking for that stuff. They're looking for tools. They're looking for equipment. Anything you use in your job, a laptop can be considered, a trigger to working in the United States.
Yeah, you're an IT professional. You have a laptop on you. They could question that. They could actually confiscate your laptop and look at it and see what's on it, as well as your phone if they wanted to verify things. So if you are working in the United States or say anything like unto it, they could refuse you entry to the United States until you get the proper authorization to do what you want to do in the United States. And run into people all the time to say, well, I know people that go all the time to the U.S. and I know they're working and they don't have a visa. How do they do it? Answer, because of what they say to the officer at the border. And we're not telling you to deceive a border officer, but I will say it happens all the time that people will say, "Oh, I'm going to my, summer property." And then they don't tell the officer, "Well, I'm also going to go visit some clients and do some work, at a client site," and whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. That is not permissible. So they come in under something that's permissible, not saying what their real intent is to come to the United States.
Right. So
and then eventually they get caught. So they may get away with it one time or two times, but then all of a sudden the border officer sees, wait a second, this guy's coming all the time. He's coming every Monday.
Or on a regular schedule, right?
They're coming every Monday, or they're spending 3 weeks a month in the United States. Yeah. What is going on here? And then they really drill with questions and they get down to the truth. And they find out, oh, wait, you're working. You can't do this. If you want to continue to do what you're doing, you have to first get a visa that authorizes you to do it.
Right.
And there are some main visas that we work with with Canadians and are able to work in the United States. I'd say the primary one is the TN1 visa status. It is designated for Canadian citizens to work in the United States under 63 designated professions. And these professions they're pretty broad. You have accountants, you have engineers, you have computer systems analysts, you have dentists, you have professors. I mean, we go on. There's 63 different ones and crazy ones that you would never think of, like a horticulturist,
soil science,
animal breeders. Yeah. There are things all over the place that qualify for a TN work visa to work in the United States.
But if you aren't working in the United States and a border officer says, "Hey, I think you're working in the United States," how do you convince them that you're not? I mean, one of the things you can bring with you would be proof that you're working in Canada. Yep. So bring some pay stubs with you.
And a letter from your employer confirming you don't work in the U.S.
Right, and that you're going on vacation for 2 weeks and you got to be back, in a couple of weeks to resume your work.
They're on paid holiday.
Yeah.
Here's a letter of confirmation.
Right. Or, maybe proof you're going to school in Canada and showing that you are, pursuing your education there and, you're on spring break and you're coming back after spring break is finished. And, then the officer may say, "Oh, okay, so I see why you're bringing your laptop. You're going to be studying. You got your
a valid reason other than work."
Right. So then you're okay. You're overcoming that presumption that you're going to be working with some evidence.
Yep. So you may need a TN visa to do what you're doing. And in addition to working in a profession that qualifies, you also have the qualifications to do so. And you must have a U.S. employer. Now, hitting on work visas, the majority of the time, you cannot self-sponsor for a work visa. And we get that question a lot. Do I need a sponsor? Well, the general answer to that is yes.
Mm-hmm.
To get a TN work visa in the United States, you must have a U.S. employer or a U.S. client who's sponsoring you for that visa. And then another common visa we see is an L1 visa. We see this where there's entities with both U.S. and foreign operations, and they're transferring qualifying employees from the foreign operation in Canada to the U.S. operation in the United States.
Or maybe not even transferring. They're just having the Canadian employee come down and do some work in the United States for a period of time, and maybe continuing to get paid by their Canadian employer, but they need to do some work in the U.S. So
yeah, once you're flagged as if you're working for, even if the company has a Canadian branch and you're lawfully employed in Canada, but they have a U.S. branch and they require you to come down periodically, they can tell you to get an L1 visa, even though you're not coming to work permanently full time in the U.S. They can tell you to get an L1 visa because you are getting paid to be here
for work that you're being performed in the border of the United States. So. Yeah,
and another mechanism for the L1 visa is maybe you have a company yourself in Canada.
Right.
And you are thinking about opening operations in the U.S. and you want to expand those operations in the United States. Maybe you have U.S. clients. Maybe you're a trucking company and you take loads to the U.S. and you don't want to do A to B, right? You want to then be able to do loads across the U.S. or whatever it might be to expand your business. You can open a U.S. operation and then use that as a mechanism to transfer yourself to the United States. We see that a lot, as well as an investor visa or what's called a trader visa. So somebody who has a large investment in the United States, and it's important to note that it cannot be purely residential or investment purposes.
Right. Yeah, a lot of people call and ask about that. Hey, I bought a house in the United States. I made a big investment. Can I, I'm going to rent this house out and it's going to be like a business, like an Airbnb. Can I get a visa for that?
Yeah.
No.
So
the answer is no.
It has to, as part of your investment, it has to be for commercial or business purposes, not residential. And you must be creating jobs for U.S. workers as a part of it. And generally say at least three U.S. workers.
Yeah.
If you have less than that, then will call into question the purpose of your investment. If it's strictly to make an income for you and your family, that's not going to qualify.
Right.
Or if it's residential. So if you're investing in a legitimate business that you need to come down here and operate, hire people because you've made that investment, then you might qualify for an e-visa. Or another situation we run into is individuals that maybe we run into this a lot with IT professionals. They have a lot of clients in the U.S. and they need to go down and perform client visits and, do on-site work for their clients. That might be a trader visa, what's called an E1 trader. An E1 trader is pretty broad, and I think it's a very underutilized visa where you have Canadian businesses that have more than 50% of their client base, international client base, so you would exclude any Canadian businesses you work with. And if you do the math and you have over 50% of your clients in the United States, well, then you might qualify for an E1 visa to service your clients in the U.S. So working, the number two reason we see, and we can give examples all over the place. So if we go back to the L1 example, we represent a big manufacturer of healthcare products, and they have offices in Canada and just over here in Buffalo. So just across the border in Niagara Falls and here in Buffalo as well. And they have some employees that have to go to meetings, and it's only a couple times a month. And for years, these people were coming across the border and they didn't have a problem until the border caught on. Hey, wait a second. Your company has U.S. branch. Or I don't know if it's the branch or the main office, but there's an affiliated U.S. office. You need a visa. You can't just be showing up to these meetings in the U.S. every week without a visa. So what did we have to do? Well, we had to get L1 visas for those individuals so they could attend those meetings in the United States. Other examples, maybe individuals who have their own Canadian company, and we run into this a lot with IT people. Maybe they're a software engineer, and they run a software engineering company out of Canada, but they have some U.S.-based clients that they service. And they've been going down to service those clients just, periodically. And then the border all of a sudden catches on. Oh, wait, you're going there quite frequently.
Right.
What are you doing? Oh, you need a visa. And that can be done. That person, if they have the right qualifications, can get a visa to then service those clients in the United States.
I mean, we see a lot of times where the border will identify the issue and say, hey, you know what, we think you need a visa to come in and do this. And they don't deny the person entry, but come on in. You know, we understand you're going to meetings today. Come on in and do that. But next time you come, we want to see a visa in your hand before we let you in to do this. So they're usually pretty agreeable about it, unless
as long as you're up front.
Yeah,
if they think you're trying to deceive them or pull the wool over their eyes, you better watch out.
Right, misrepresentation. I mean, that's a bigger issue.
Well, and I think that leads into our final reason for refusal that we see, right? Inadmissibility issues.
Right.
What is inadmissibility? Well, in order to come to the United States, you have to show that you meet the criteria to enter, either as an immigrant or non-immigrant. If you can't show that you meet that criteria, then you're inadmissible. And it's up to you to prove that you are otherwise admissible for them to allow you to enter the United States.
Right.
So, for example, for visa exempt person, you need to show that you're coming for a valid reason. But maybe you have a valid reason, and when you were younger, you decided that you would, smoke a lot of weed, and then you were hitting the bong a little too hard, and you got arrested, and now you have this charge from your past.
Now you're criminally inadmissible.
So you have issues in your past.
Right.
Maybe you have, assault and battery. Who knows? We could go on and on about the charges that you could have in the past.
Yeah, there's certain convictions, and it's not necessarily just charges, but certain convictions that you have in your criminal history that will make you inadmissible to the United States. Not all of them. So it's a little different than Canada. Canada doesn't admit people with DUIs. The United States will. So if you have a simple DUI in Canada, you shouldn't be inadmissible to the U.S. The reverse is not true for Americans going to Canada, but that is something that won't cause you admissibility issues. But other things are beyond, criminal issues.
Fraud is the big one.
Misrepresentation and fraud. So yeah, if you've lied at the border before and you've been busted for that, they may have a transcript, where you admitted to.
Not may. So this is a good point. When you have an interaction at a port of entry, whether you believe it or not, it's being recorded. They may be nice to you and refuse you and let you in or whatever and give you advice. Those officers have ulterior motives every time. And I promise you that. Just come back and we'll help you out. Yeah. Well, they're baiting you. If you don't come back with the right information, you're going to be even more trouble. So if you think you can show up at the Peace Bridge, for example, get refused and then drive over to Lewiston, Queenston and come in, you have another thing coming. The Peace Bridge will have put in the system the reasons they refused you, and then when you show up at Lewiston, Queenston, they're going to pull those notes up, and they're going to, and unless you've rectified whatever it is that you need to enter, then you're going to just cause yourself more trouble.
Right.
That's called port shopping.
And that's their coworker, right? So they're not prone to overcoming decisions of their coworkers.
And who do you think they're going to believe?
Right.
Not you.
Yeah. So if there's a flag, some kind of fraud or misrepresentation in your background, you may be inadmissible to the United States.
And the reasons we talked about in the beginning, your intent and working in the U.S. could be inadmissible reasons, right? You're inadmissible because you have the wrong intent, or you're inadmissible because you don't have a work visa. Those ones typically are very easy to overcome, right? You show that you aren't immigrating, that you're just coming as a visitor. You show that, okay, I am going to work, but here, this time I brought the paperwork I need in order to get the proper visa to work. So if you have been refused or denied entry into the United States, it's recorded.
Right. I mean, there's a whole host of other reasons too. So there's security reasons you may be inadmissible. Certain nationalities for certain periods of time get higher scrutiny.
Yep.
That happens just because of world events. Maybe, memberships in certain organizations can make you inadmissible.
Service in certain military units.
Sure. Any of this could be a security.
Political affiliations.
Consider you a security risk, and they bar your entry from entering the United States until you can prove to them that you're not a member, you weren't a member of these organizations.
And the burden's on you to prove that.
Right.
If you have to show up with physical evidence to show otherwise. And if you cannot do that, then they don't have to allow you to enter the United States.
And I mean, we field a lot of calls in this area, and I will tell you that 9 times out of 10, if they have, determined that you're inadmissible to the United States, there's usually something there.
Yeah, they're good at their job. And whether that's as a visitor or, working or one of these other more severe inadmissibility reasons, they're good at identifying it. That's what they do. So,
they're trained.
Yeah. Our advice, any interaction you have at a port of entry, pre-flight inspection, when you're entering the United States, be honest. Be upfront with those officers. Even if you have a situation that might require, a waiver or a visa in the future to enter, if you are honest in that interaction, then the next time you try to come back, then they'll know that. And then you come back with the evidence that they're requesting, you're going to find it much easier to come back if you're prepared with the right evidence and documentation to seek entry. Because if not, they can flag you to the extent that you're essentially never coming back to the U.S.
Right.
If they don't like you, what you've said and how you've interacted, I've seen these border officers, I won't say ruin people's lives because the person ruined their life because of what they said and did at the border, but they put it in there and it's in that system, and they could make your life very, very, very difficult to come to the United States.
I've heard cases people call in and the officer may have just had an inkling that this person was, had a reason to be denied entry. And the person acts belligerently at the border.
Yeah.
They're flagged and now they can't come in because of that behavior. And, it may have been something minor that we would have been able to overcome, but now with this flag and this behavior at the border, they're not getting in easily.
Yeah, and that's another good point. A lot of these issues can be avoided if you seek proper advice and you do your research ahead of time. We see people take it for granted that they can just come into the United States because they're Canadian and they don't think twice about it, right? They assume, I have a Canadian passport, I can just go. Well, maybe. Depends on what you're doing, but be careful. Do your research ahead of time. Make sure you don't need a visa. Make sure you don't have something in your past that might impact your ability to come to the U.S. If you are applying for a visa, make sure you have the right paperwork because, again, when you make these attempts at the port of entry, it's being documented.
Yeah.
And they will know that you've had those interactions. So it's best to go prepared.
Right.
The first time.
Be deferent to these officers. They're doing a job and they're trying to protect the border of the United States. And, there are threats out there. So
I see a lot of fraud, misrepresentation.
Yeah,
I would say that's the number one thing they see is people lie to them all the time.
Right. And I think it's part of their training too, for them to be hard on people sometimes. So if they're being hard on you and curt with you, they're probably trying to find out something and they're using a certain technique. Just be deferent, remain professional, and usually the circumstance will be diffused, by your behavior instead of escalated.
Yeah, and keep in mind that they share information and systems with Canada. One of my, and I've ran into this multiple times when we used to be able to go to the port of entry with clients, and you'd sit there as they're either going through the interview for a TN or an L visa. And this several times this happened. I'm there with the border officer and my client. And the officer asks the client, have you ever been arrested anytime in your life? Client, no, never. The officer looks at the client, asks again, are you sure that you have never been arrested ever anytime in your life? No, never. The officer kind of gives me a little stare and then says, okay, have a seat. I sit down with my client and I say, he's asking you that multiple times.
He's looking
because
at
there is something in his system that says you have.
Right.
I said, have you been? And this is not.
Yeah.
This didn't just happen one time. This happened multiple
And
times.
let me guess. Can I guess here? He said, yeah, but it was dismissed, or yeah, but that was supposed to be sealed.
That was youthful offender. It was dismissed. That was sealed. Or I was just a kid.
They can't know about that.
Yeah,
right.
That was 40 years ago.
Yeah, there's no way they know about that.
Exactly. And yes, they do.
Yeah.
So be honest, because then now you're flagged. So in those situations, I was able to talk to the client, and they say, I had this DUI and I'm just embarrassed, didn't want to talk. Well, they know it's not a big deal. They're going to let you in with your DUI.
Right.
But you lying about it and trying to cover up could actually make you inadmissible. So don't do that.
So now they're not trusting anything you say at that point.
You just told one lie. Now, they may not even believe you qualify for this visa. They may not even believe that
this is a temporary visit.
Yeah, or a valid job offer.
Right.
So they question everything you say once you get caught in a lie.
Yeah.
So be careful. And I'm be careful is the wrong thing to say. Be honest. Be
That is
upfront.
the right thing to say.
right?
Be honest. Yeah.
Be honest. Just tell the truth. If you're coming to the United States or you have a legitimate reason, what do you have to hide? If you have something to hide, well,
give us a call.
we can't give you, no, well, I don't know about that. Then, you should be obtaining the proper authorization prior to entering the United States. You shouldn't be approaching a port of entry with the intent to deceive and to enter the United States.
Right. And hopefully this information helps you to know when you will need that.
So if you have any questions about your admissibility to the United States, if you've been denied entry to the United States, we can help. We deal
Or if
with
you need to work in the United States.
work, live permanently, all of those. There's a mechanism for all of it, as long as it's done right. So also plug for our YouTube channel and our website. There's a lot of good resources out there that are available to you. Our website has an FAQ section where a lot of these questions are answered. If you have questions and need more details about specific things, jump on our website, go to the search bar, search what it is that you're looking for. And if it's not there, you can also submit a question. Say, hey, this wasn't there. Can you answer it for me? And we'd be glad to help you out. Thank you for listening today. Hopefully you found it helpful, and we look forward to meeting with you again in the future. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.